How's everybody doing? Would you guys be willing to do a huge favor? Will everyone just come as far forward as you can? There's just not a lot of people. Everyone's so scared of the front row, I don't get what it is every time. It's always just Zach. And used to when, yeah. Forward, squeeze together. Yeah. All the introverts miss social distancing. So I'm Brent. This is my wife, Bethany.
Hi, guys. You don't even know this. Worship is very crazy for me. Every single song that we sing, there was a line in it that I swear we put in our PowerPoint. So it's just one of those weird moments of like, oh, I don't know, anytime that someone hands you a mic and they're like, say something that's going to lead people closer to God, there's like this pressure to have it be relevant to like their season of life and what they're going through. And so it's really encouraging.
So something off topic, weather. I just have to share something this is completely irrelevant to the sermon at all. It's not in our notes, but I hate when people talk about the weather, like as a whole, as a collective. So there's times where there's heat waves, because there's always one someone's like, there's never heat waves here. I'm like, there's always a heat wave. Do you guys not, like, every year? And everyone's like, it never happens this early. I'm like, it always happens, or I don't. But it's like the most like generic thing. I hate small talk. I partially think I credit my awkwardness to that. Like if you ever we don't know each other very well, I apologize. But I just hate like small talk. It's like this is so ingenuine. There's no really point to this. It's like, so that weather, huh? Yeah, I get it. It's hot. I'm sweating out of every area of my body. I don't want to think about it anymore. We can move on. We're all aware. So that's it. That has nothing to do with our sermon. I just wanted to talk about it. If you're one of those people, maybe talk about anything else.
You've been warned.
So we're talking about the Enneagram. We're on Enneagram 6. I am an Enneagram 6. Beth here is an Enneagram 9. Zach asked me to speak, and I actually wanted to include Beth because we're going to talk a little bit about the Enneagram 6, which I'll cover, and then we're going to talk about what it means to kind of the health points and unhealth points of being in that. So we'll kind of go back and forth a little bit.
Good. We just kind of want to reiterate, when we talk about the Enneagram, we're not preaching it as like ultimate truth. We believe that the Bible and God's Word is the ultimate truth, and so we're just preaching this as like a really effective tool that when you use it in light of that can really help you understand people. My friend Mandy, it was her and her husband Trent that actually really introduced us to the Enneagram. But my friend Mandy, she's an 8, and she said, I really love the Enneagram because I feel like I'm not as annoyed with people anymore. And I just really felt that in my soul. Like, when you know, oh, this is why you act that way. This is why you perceive the world in that way. It just really, thank you, God.
Yeah, it's been really helpful. It annoys me a little bit more than it annoys Bethany. Because I hate when people find this new thing and then they start talking. At our old church, they use the disc test. You guys know what the disc test is? And the disc is even a little more annoying because there's only 4 categories. You're like, oh, that's such an S thing to say. You're like, what? It's just so obnoxious. You're just so generalized into this basic function. I'm not a penguin. I'm me. I've got other motivations beyond just being an S or an I or whatever it was. So that was really annoying. I remember we actually met one of some friends of some friends. I'm not going to call them out, but I said something, I can't remember what it was. I was more or less joking, man, that could happen, and then there could be this big, she's like, wow, that's such a 6 thing to say. And I was like, I just met you, and I already am not liking you because of that comment, which is a 6 thing to not like you almost immediately, but even still. So I think use it healthily. Don't just overdo it and don't annoy people by pushing their Enneagram onto them, it's a weird thing that no one really likes. And people are usually going to be more defensive about that anyways.
Oh, not your wife.
Yeah, you and Ashley were so annoying for the first month. Oh man, it was unbearable. We made a house rule about it. Who's 6s here? Okay. Who's 9s? 3s? Yeah. I think, okay, this is going to sound bad. There might be some 3s in here who've been living in some unhealth, who might be 6s. We're going to talk about that, and maybe that'll... I'm not trying to be mean. You just might not realize, because you might relate more with a 6, and same with 9s. Maybe you're a really healthy 6. So like maybe through this, and I think that could be true about the whole Enneagram. So maybe this will help you understand how, if you're functioning really well in one other area, then maybe you're actually this. And so we're going to talk a lot about kind of that core trauma and how that's really a good way to relate as well. Okay, this is the most unprepared I've ever been for a sermon, in like the way that like I'm...
Okay, you guys. My last sermon that we preached, I think I spent like 3 months preparing for this thing. I had a slideshow of 68 slides. I am like prepared. So this has been a real growing experience writing it together, because I'm just like, no, we need to have everything that we're going to say written out, dialed down. He's like, no, babe, it's just conversational. It'll be fine. It's like, yeah. It's good. It's good for me. It's good.
Well, like, I'm usually like, I'm the teacher, right? I'm the boring guy who's got like my sticky notes, and like I like to like use some exegesis and really dig out the scripture. Well, this is more like you take the scriptures and you kind of apply them to what you're trying to teach through the Enneagram. It's just a really different way. And so I thought one of the best ways would be to have us to kind of go back and forth. I actually just ran into Matt, and we were talking about how you guys were almost going to do the same thing. And I think it's a great way, because you might not notice unhealthy things in your life. They're just normal. But, you know, the person who spends a lot of time with you might notice those things. So hopefully you'll learn a little bit more about our relationship and our unhealth, our pain points and annoyances, and what it looks like to grow together. Because at the end of the day, we're all in relationships, and that's what creates our accountability to not just be part of the Enneagram health points, but the sanctification process, and that person who's going to push you towards who God wants you to be. I had a hard time accepting that I was a 6. I think a lot of 6s will, and that's why I think a lot of 3s who might actually be 6s would also. A 6 almost kind of sounds like a pansy. I don't mean that in like a mean way, but you're kind of like, oh, you're a people pleaser. Like, that doesn't sound the best all the time, you know? But it's kind of true. It's kind of true to the core that you kind of change your habits in a sense to please other people, which I just didn't want to accept. Someone told me I was a 6. When I had first heard about the Enneagram, this person just pegged me, and she knew me pretty well, so I should have probably just taken it. But I was like, no, and I have a lot of 5 attributes. My wing 5 is really strong, and more often than not, if you see me interacting up here, I'm probably acting more in my 5 wing, and same with at work. But like to the core, like the trauma that I kind of come from, I think I act like a 6, and I'm more motivated by my 6. So that's how I was able to kind of figure that out. So basically, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my testimony, why I think how I figured out that I was a 6, and I think you really have to start breaking down. If you're really going to discover who you are in your Enneagram, you have to understand why you act the way you do. So growing up, you just took out everything that I wrote, didn't you? I did. Yeah, she knew that I would just read off of it. So basically, growing up, we were really, really poor. We lived in Florida in one of like the poorest neighborhoods in Jacksonville. It was super sketchy. So my dad moved my mom and I and him up. My parents were never married. I was an accident, like the true accident. You're like, oh, didn't know I was spending this much of my life with that person. That was, dang. That kind of accident, when I hear the story at least. So people are like, I was an accident. Like, well, your parents were like married and they had like jobs. And they were like, oh yeah, we didn't mean to. But like, no, not that kind of accident. Anyways, irrelevant. So we moved from Florida to Montana when I was about 5, and parents were both just super poor, had no plan kind of my dad was about to start college. He had just gotten out of the Navy because he had torn his ACL, so he couldn't carry on. And then my mom she had 3 other kids, and so we were struggling pretty hard. 2 of my brother and my sister moved with us. One of my brothers stayed down there. So we grew up, and it was just brutal. We were probably moving 4 to 5 times a year because my mom just couldn't pay the bills, and there was just a lot of other stuff and mental health issues and stuff going on at home. And so, we'd get evicted and we'd lose everything. I remember one time, it's one of the places I had the most memories. We stayed there for a while, but we got evicted, and I didn't really know that until the day of. And my mom picks me up from my dad's because I was staying with him for the weekend. She's like, hey, we got to go by the house really quick. And I was like, wait, why can't we go in the house? And I was kind of young, so I hadn't really figured out what was happening at that point. And I remember her sending me and my sister in the window, because we were only people small enough, through the back window to go retrieve some of the stuff that had gotten locked at our house. And I was like, when you grow up and you start to realize some of that stuff, you're like, oh, that was not right. Okay. That's called stealing. I mean, it's our own stuff, so it's a little mixed bag. But so I think there was already this natural instability, and from that point started a lot of like, we'd start staying at like boyfriends' houses or this person's house, and my parents had split custody. So my dad was like really stable and was trying he was going to school, he became a nurse, like he did everything to try and like create some stability on that one side. But then I'd go switch to my mom's house, and it was just utter chaos, like no rules, my brothers going to juvie left and right and stealing and drinking and all that kind of stuff. My sister, she was just a wreck because when you grow up in that environment. But anyways, so all this kind of created this deep instability in my life. And so I just didn't know what to latch onto, and I never knew how to kind of trust what was being told to me. It was always like, everything's okay, but then a week later, nothing was okay, And so you start to never trust what you're told. And I think, so there's two sides of that. There's that side, and there's school was really rough. Kids were just really mean to me from a pretty young age, and I just remember kind of, you start really internalizing that, and you start never really being able to trust it, because then my own friends, or the people I thought would be my friends, would be really mean to me, and you start to feel really alone in that world, and you grow up in that environment, and you're just struggling every single time, and there never feels like this really stable. So it's really heavy, but it's like I had to really unpack that to recognize, like, I can't trust anybody. And I think Beth would agree with that. In the beginning of our relationship, it was always like, is Beth going to leave? Is she trustworthy? Can I really depend on her? And over time, our relationship's been really healing and healthy for me, because she is the most consistent human being that I know, in almost every regard. And so that's really good. But, there's still that part of me that, it's always like everything. How many of you sixes, or raise your hands again? Yeah. Like anxiety, pretty big thing, like always worrying, always wondering, always not really like trusting situations. That's definitely, I think, built into our core. And so for me, it was always unpacking those areas and trying to understand why that trauma really built into me. This inability to understand my environment, this inability to trust in the environment and the people around me. And so naturally, I think I grew very untrusting of people and what they told me. So sorry, that's really heavy, but I think it's so key to understand that. I think we all have that trauma that we carry, and how it's formed you into the behaviors and patterns that you have. All right, qualities of a 6. It's a really big jump there. So we're the loyalists. We're the committed, security-oriented types. We just deeply want to 6s again, and maybe 9s and 3s, you might get this. Do you hate when you work for somebody or work, and you're doing something, and they're like, yeah, just do what you want, and you're like, oh, no. Because here's the thing, in my mind, I know that you want something specific. I know you can have the vision, and what I see might be different, and so I want you to tell me what you want so that I can achieve that goal. Because if I do what I want, then you're mad at me, then I'm going to be pissed. And so it's kind of this mind game. You're trying to no, so just tell me exactly. Draw me a map. Give me that thing that God gave to Noah for the ark. These 3,000 cubits. He's out there measuring with his thumb. I want exact details so this plan works. So that's really challenging, I think, for us as 6s. So if you work or know or relationships with 6s, make sure if you have something that you want done, you tell them exactly. The first time, it's just going to save you a lot of time. It's going to save them a lot of stress. Just straight to the point. This is what I want from you. Our key desire is to have safety, support, and security, to surround ourselves with things that are reliable and stable. So we really like stability. I think if you'll probably see a lot of 6s, they once they're at a job, even if it doesn't pay the most, or even if it's not the most ideal in terms of what they're maybe trying to achieve, they will stay at that job because it's loyal and they know they can trust it. Or vice versa, if it's an unstable, untrusting situation, they're going to be out of there as fast as they can, because it's that anxiety and that stress is going to it will kill you. So common attributes: we're reliable, hardworking, and trustworthy. We're cautious and indecisive, but also reactive. We're excellent troubleshooters because we perceive problems and foster communication. What? Oh, core sin. I wrote these down. I literally that's what I was saying. I was so unprepared for this in the sense that like I knew what I wanted to go with, but then I got here and then like we were saying stuff in prayer. I was like, oh, that reminds me of this and this reminds me, and I'm just like, I'm over here like typing. I'm like trying to be spiritual, but I'm also like having this moment of revelation of what I wanted to say. Core sin, lust. So I've really thought about this, and I think it's really true for me and most other 6s I've met, is that we struggle with lust. I don't think that's just purely a sexual thing. I think that's also like coveting to some degree. You covet what other people have. And if you think about it, so the 3, 6, 9 works in the triangle. So if you're an unhealthy 6, you act as a 3. And 3s try to build an image of themselves, for themselves, to look a certain way. So if you're in church, you're going to really be religious. You're going to be trying to do all the right things, say the right things, look the right way, so you perceive to be, the right thing. So when it comes to lust, I think it's this idea that you are so fundamentally struggling with your identity and you are so determined by what others think of you and wanting others to like you, whether that be in an intimate way, someone you think's cute or whatever it is, or, people who people of influence are in your life who you don't think like you. So you allow them to define you. And in this way, you have this lust towards them in the sense that they define you. And, it's not the same as love where you are actually corresponding, you are giving back in that relationship, but you need them to define you in a way that's positive and that's uplifting and that gives you this sense of affirmation. Affirmation's a really big struggle with 6s. We really need it. And when 6s again, is one of your love languages affirmation, words of affirmation? I have not met a 6 yet who it's not. It is so core to who we are. We need to know that we're doing things right. And you need to tell, you know what I mean? So you get done with something and you're looking is it good? Was it good? And it's not this I need praise, I want to be puffed up. It's was that good? How bad did I screw it up? Oh my God, they're never going to talk to me again. That's the unhealthy 6, but it is it's definitely in there, especially growing up. That's a hard thing to get over. So, but God told me this. He told me this year, which is so weird that I was just driving my car and I think I was thinking about something. Someone had said something to me. I can't even really remember what the moment was because there's so many, you're just cycling things. 6 is just conversation just replay in their heads just over and over again. Did I say that wrong? Did I do that wrong? Was that me? It's just anxiety is just trying to satisfy and fulfill that you're basically your own worst enemy. Stuff I think that if I could give any word of peace before I move on to this next point to 6s, no one cares about you as much as you think they do. And that's a really to your benefit. And the reason is, and that could be to anyone who deals with anxiety or wanting people to like them, as soon as you're done with that conversation, no matter how awkward or stumbly or what terrible it was, that person will likely never think about that because most people are self-obsessed or they just don't care and they've moved on entirely. And it's really convenient because you are the only person who will continue to torture you. 6s, that time in 3rd grade where you peed your pants or whatever it is that you are terrorizing yourself over night after night, sleepless nights, no one remembers that. No, and the select few who do need to move on, honestly, and no one cares what those people think. So let that be to the 6s and to anyone who just tortures yourself. You do not need to be your own worst enemy. God has redeemed you. You are good to go. Time to move on. But yeah, so I was in the car. God told me that if I'm always trying to get everyone's approval, I will never be happy. And I know it's a really simple thing. You hear that all the time. But I legitimately, it was so revolutionary to me. I will never be happy. Because there is always a person. There's always this person. You're I don't know if they like me. I don't know if I have their approval. And you're always struggling to get there. And then you finally get their approval. There's that moment of satisfaction. Man, when we first started dating, I thought Craig Brown hated me. If anyone knows Craig Brown, there's a lot of people who think at first that Craig Brown hates them. It's not his fault. You have to get over it, honestly. It's just his face. And it's just his kind of general, he's always thinking internally. His wife gets on him all the time. We're really good friends with them. It's not RBF, but it is kind of in the same vein of just he looks like he's judging you. Anyways, so Beth lived in his basement. I had to go over there every night, and I was just oh, God. I don't want to see Craig. I just thought he hated me. And now me and him, we're just texting about joining the soccer team, just yesterday. And it's just so for a long time, that was when I need to get Craig's approval, and I was a much unhealthier person at that point. But at the same time, there's always a person. There's always someone in your life who you feel if you don't get their approval, you just can't finally settle and be happy. And God's that is an endless cycle. You will never be happy. if that is. So you just, I mean, honestly, think of a person in your life who doesn't like you and just thrive on it. Just love it. Be like, you know what? I'm glad you don't like me. I'm not too fond of you either, honestly. Like, not in like a non-Christ way. Like, I love you and I have that compassion. But in terms of the relationship, usually that person, there's something more wrong with them than there is with you, honestly. I don't mean that in like a self-righteous, pious way. I mean that in the sense, like, if someone doesn't like you and they don't even know you that well, Connor White told me this, old pastor. He's like, you can't take that personally. If someone's talked to you 5 times and they don't like you, like, that's a really weird mentality to have, and they probably need to work on that more than you need to change yourself to fit the idea of what they have for you. So get out of that cycle. Okay, moving on. I promise, honey, you'll get to talk at some point. At our best, 6s are self-reliant, fearless leaders, grounded, quiet-minded, positive, genuine faith. That's fantastic. Perfectly independent and interdependent. At their worst, they're self-deprecating, highly reactive, defensive, quick to project insecurities onto other people, negative and moody, anxious, skeptical, and overly cautious, and allow their doubts to consume them. Okay, talking to the 6s again. I know there's only 2 of you, but I'm just going to assume there's more of you. How many of you were really bad at driving at first? And I've just talked about this because you're so scared that you're going to break a rule. It's not like you just don't know how to drive. I mean, it's a fairly simple thing, but like you're so scared that you're going to break a rule in doing it that you're just like, oh my God. Or just most new things that are new. You're really bad at first, and then you just look at excellent like after like 2 months because you're like finally have the confidence to like do it. But at first you're just so overthinking every little detail. So it's just something you might notice about 6s is they're never going to be the person who's like natural at everything right away because they have to like feel it out and learn that and feel confident in the rhythm. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Bethany.
You know, he says that. I will not drive with him in the car. Like, it is not good for our marriage. Because I am just driving, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, babe! And I'm like, what? And in his eyes, I'm like about to hit the car or something dramatic. And I feel stressed because I'm like, I have very successfully drone. I have not killed anybody yet. I think that I'm doing okay.
You say that, right? You hear that. I don't call a lot of people bad drivers. There's 2 people in my life, really good friends of mine, who I call bad drivers. Bethany and Connor White. They are 2 people who I drive with on a regular basis, who the whole time I am student driver braking, because they try to park in the back end of the car in front of you. And it stresses me to high heavens. I don't know why. Maybe it's a 6. Whatever it is, it scares the bejesus out of me. But she says that, and then she tells me the story the other day when her and Ashley were going to Trader Joe's in Washington, and she's like, I almost got hit by 3 cars. And I'm like, 1 time, I'd believe it's the other car. 2 times, I would even be like, you know, that intersection or that on-ramp is kind of sketchy. 3 times, you were consistently being part of the problem. There was a time when we were driving in Colorado, and she was driving, and I looked up, and this semi just happened to be very tall, but the top of our car was literally under the bottom part of this semi, and that's one of the, it was all I could say. I couldn't even, tell her what to do. It was just, and she's like, you need to stop doing that. I'm like, So that is our relationship with driving. It's just better if I drive. Sorry, honey, continue.
Okay. In Colorado, it was really small lanes, okay? It was construction, and he was definitely on my side of the road. So I rebuked that. And as for Trader Joe's, it was in Washington, okay? Washington drivers are terrible. That is all I'm going to say about that. 3 times. Almost died. I had precious cargo in the car. Lots of cookie butter. So I remember when we first started dating, and we had just moved out to Kalispell, and I think we were there 2 weeks, and I met this friend, and I was like, wow, she's amazing, I love her. I'm not going to steal the 9 thunder, but 9s, assume that everybody loves them. complete opposites. And their tendency is almost to overshare to an extent. And so my first coffee date with her, I like unload whole life story. So I get back to hanging out with Brent. I'm like, babe, I met this girl. She's amazing. I think we're gonna be really good friends. He's like, babe, I don't think you should have shared all of that. And I immediately am like, you're just being kind of skeptical. Like, you don't even know this girl. Yeah, no, like 3 days later, it turned out that he was totally right, and I got played. And so I've really learned to value just the wisdom of the sixes for their natural skepticism. I remember having this like shocking revelation because I had been going to church my entire life. When he told me I didn't have to just accept everything that a preacher said. Like, I could challenge that, and it's such a simple thing, but in my brain, I never went there. So, whenever I first found out about the Enneagram 6, I definitely kind of just pegged them as, like, the anxious type, and I now know a lot better. But there's two types of sixes. One of them is the counterphobic six, and that's kind of like I need to deal with this problem right now. Like, there is a problem, I need to fix it. And then the other type is the phobic six, and they're just kind of like paralyzed by fear. They will acknowledge the problem, they just won't do anything about it until they die. Which they say this is an Enneagram 6 thing. Honestly, I think everyone is this way. And so I remember the weirdest thing is Brent and I don't fight very often. When our definition of like a really bad fight is like he'll say something rational to me and I just will like shut down for 10 minutes and then I'll respond and then he'll say something rational to me again and then I'll shut down again for 10 minutes then be like, okay, you're right, I think I'm ready to move on, are you? And then like that's the fight. Like it's very weird. But the biggest thing that we will always like butt heads on is just our paces and the way that we approach life. I am very slow to move with everything. I do dishes slow. I do everything slow. And he's like very, like, this needs to happen right now. And if there's a problem with our finances at like 11 o'clock at night, he will wake me up at 11 o'clock at night because it needs to be taken care of right now. And to me, I will not do that. I will procrastinate until the day that I die.
Sixes, who's counterphobic? Who's phobic? You don't know? Counterphobic? I actually guessed that about you. Because it's like, with being counterphobic, like, there's two very different sixes. Like, there's kind of her, if she's acting sort of unhealthy, I'll know because, like, she'll hide from stuff. I'll be like, did you do that? She's like, no. And she just doesn't want to talk to me about it because I know that she's, like, genuinely just does not want to think about it because the amount of anxiety. For me, it's like, the amount of anxiety cannot go away until said task is accomplished. And so she's right. It's like it's 11 o'clock at night. I'm like, oh, well, this has to go. I'm never going to sleep. So it's like I have to achieve things the moment that they come into my head. So that's really challenging. You know, there's definitely two types, and you have to understand that and know how to deal with that. If you're in sort of a relationship or friendship with someone who's a phobic six, you might have to be the person who's like, hey, you probably need to take care of that. If you're in a relationship or friendship with someone who's a counterphobic six, you're like, hey, this can wait until after dinner. Like, you know, you have to kind of be able to navigate that and help a six rationalize the moment and understand that things need to happen or not to happen. Because it can really consume us. It can be pretty hard for us to put things down or ever pick them up. Bethany, hit the wings.
You can tackle it.
Wait, am I just talking about my wing 5? Oh, wing 5, wing 7. So wing 5, we seek security by investing in strong beliefs and aligning with a group, more inclined to delve deeply into a hobby or specific area of interest, which is me to a T. I just keep acquiring hobbies. Can be aggressive for a cause, strong focus on fairness and loyalty, skeptical, reactive to sources of authority that seem unjust or unfair, more introverted than a wing 7, and serious, focused, and self-controlled. Wing 7 attempt to quiet anxiety and self-doubt with close connections and humor, funny and likable, loyal and inclined to sacrifice for significant other, procrastinates, more extroverted and lighthearted than a wing 5, easily distracted. See, here's the deal. You hear all those, and you think, like, everyone, I've heard that people can have kind of 2 wings depending on their situation. You know, they can kind of be a wing 5 or a wing 7. I have no wing 7. I'm neither fun, lighthearted. I do procrastinate. I've got that one. And I'm easily distracted. So, okay, a little bit of wing 7, but for the most part, 99.9% of wing 5. So that's probably why that's so strong. Benefits of the 6 in a team. Oh, man, you gave me nothing to go off of there. So it said earlier that we're really good troubleshooters. I think that's true because we naturally, as 6s, just think so far ahead on everything. And we really, like, our brains are kind of naturally channeled to just, like, think about a problem and solve it. I think especially counterphobic 6s, but I think 6s as a whole, we're just naturally always thinking that next step. So within a team, we're really, really good at figuring out problems. So if you are in a team or a relationship or whatever, I'll really dive into that and allow that 6 to have that area of strength because they will thrive in that. It's something I love doing at work. As someone comes to me with a problem, and they're all stressed out, I'm like, yeah, let me figure it out. And I just love, it's kind of like a puzzle to some extent, except for like a real puzzle because those are terrible, but like a mind puzzle. In the kingdom, I think naturally a 6 can really, I think we're kind of a bit of chameleons to some degree. Obviously, we have natural tendencies, but I think a 6 really, in the mindset of where we are, like 3s are really image-driven, or 1s have to be organized and have to be really structured and are really passionate. I think 6s can really be like, where am I needed? And I think naturally 6s are really servants. I think that's part of that loyalty mentality, is if we're in on the cause, if we're in on what the mission of what we're doing is, then it's like, just put me wherever I'm needed, like put me where I'm needed most, and just driving towards that. And I think that's one thing that's really great about being a 6, is that it's not necessarily about the name's on the, what's that one from Canvas? It's not the name on the back of the shirt, it's on the name on the front of the shirt, and we really buy into that mentality that it's really about putting the mission first. I think there's a lot of challenges within the call of a 6 challenges within the call of Jesus for a 6. I think there's almost more of those that we have to overcome in terms of like the health and unhealth of a 6, because the call of Jesus is hard for anybody really, but 6s are natural skeptics, so they naturally struggle with the nature of God and the idea of faith. Need water. We struggle with the idea of faith because we're skeptical. I mean, that's just pretty natural, that if like God tells you something, this is what's going to happen, so on and so forth, and it's just really struggling, or it's really challenging for us to believe that because we're so worried about it. We try and take things in our own hands. Right? We're like, oh, well, I see that problem's coming, and so we're going to try and attack it and take care of it. So when God's like, just has you in a season of waiting, or he says something's going to happen and it's not happening, you're like, all right, God, you said it was going to happen, and then you're trying to take it into your own hands. So we really are challenged by that. I think naturally, I'm just going to say that in this scenario that doubting Thomas was a 6, because I think most of us would have been Thomas. I think we really are challenged by the idea of faith, and had we naturally heard that Jesus was risen, we'd be like, all right, I got to touch the hole. I got to know it's the real guy. I can't, we would have thought it's a ghost, it's a fake, it's an apparition, it's whatever. We just need to have the cold hard facts, and I think we would have been the last to walk on the water because we wouldn't have trusted, We would have had our water wings on and our vest, and we would have been like, touching a toe out off of the boat, like, because we don't trust the process, we don't trust in ourselves, and we don't have that confidence. So 6s would be the last person off the boat, in my opinion. And I think this is probably the biggest one. We struggle with the desire to be liked and staying true to the truth of Jesus. When you want to be liked by people and you want to be approved of, it's really hard to have a message and a gospel that is completely counterintuitive to modern culture. When everyone is telling you, you're a bigot, or whatever it is, in modern culture, I don't have to go over that. You guys know kind of what's happening. But the message of Jesus is going to be harder and harder to really be true to it and not differ in what you believe when people are coming and confronting you. And they are not going to like you. I promise you that. The more we move through culture over the next 20 years and the more things change, it is going to be very challenging. And 6s, I think, are very susceptible to vary off of that path and to not stay true to what Jesus says, even if it's just on a small issue, just one issue or 2 issues or whatever it is, and to start trying to be liked. I know I've done that in the past. I know that I've, even at the smallest level, changed when people are kind of coming at me and are like, well, what about this and what about that? And I'm just like, well, I guess that could kind of be true if you're thinking about it from this perspective. And it's been something I've had to grow out of as I mature in my faith, that you can't please everyone and please Jesus. So I use this scripture to reference it. It's Matthew 13, 1 through 8. Down. So that same day, Jesus went out to the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around that when he got into... I'm just going to read this part. So you guys know the parable of the seeds. If you don't, I just have a lot to get through in these scriptures. But I'm going to go straight to this. And other seeds fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Yeah, it's right there. 7. I picked that one specifically. I think all of these areas can specifically relate to you in any given season in terms of being a certain type of seed. But I think when the pressures of the world come up and choke, when your finances, when the things that it's hard to believe that God is going to be your provider, is going to be sovereign and take care of you, I think it can be really challenging for 6s to believe in that, because we're so anxiety driven, we're so worried, and we just want to take things in our own hands because we have a hard time trusting that God's going to. So it's very easy for the thorns of the world to come up and choke the gospel and steal it from you. So I think it's just something you have to be cautious of. Matthew 10:33. But whoever disowns me before others, I will disown before my Father in heaven. As you have these conversations, as culture does change and shifts away from being really towards the postmodern culture that we're heading into, it's going to be really challenging, because it would be easy for you to disown Jesus, even at the smallest level, and say, I believe this, or I'm going to follow this, or really I'm choosing the same way, that for the autonomy for myself of what I think's right. It'd be really easy for 6s to do that. I think you're going to be really challenged. I think I'm going to be really challenged as more and more people dislike me. It's going to become a crowd. It already is, people I don't even know just for what we believe. So it's going to be really challenging for 6s in that way. Galatians 1:10. Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. Pretty self-explanatory, but if you're trying to please people, you're never going to serve Christ at the truest level that you're called to. Okay, Beth?
Yeah, I think everything that he's talking about is super relatable to a 6, but I think honestly that's just human condition too. We all kind of desire to be liked and desire for people to, agree with us, and so it's really hard to understand the gospel and to be willing to be bold and vulnerable and to share that even when people are looking at you and they clearly do not agree. So we're actually going to break away a little bit from the 6. We're going to go over health and unhealth. I think this is a really great way that the Enneagram can help you kind of gauge where you're at on your health level. The book, The Road Back to You, the authors write, human beings are wired for survival. As little kids, we instinctually place a mask called personality over parts of our authentic self to protect us from harm and make our way in the world. Made up of innate qualities, coping strategies, conditional reflexes, and defense mechanisms, among lots of other things, a personality helps us know and do what we sense is required to please our parents, to fit in, to relate well to our friends, and to satisfy the expectations of our culture, and to get our basic needs met. So basically, what they're saying is you move closer to health when you learn to kind of break down those defense mechanisms and those things that your brain's kind of wired to protect you. That's when you start to move closer to health. So Riso and Hudson, they're actually, in a sense, I don't know if they're just founders of, I think they're the founders of the Enneagram Institute. They kind of describe it as like a rubber band on a pegboard. Yeah, thanks, babe. So imagine you've got a pegboard and a rubber band on it. Your level of health is pretty stagnant, but throughout the day it might fluctuate a little bit based off of your circumstances, how stressful work was, what's going on relationally. But getting to a healthier place, in a sense, would be like moving the peg. And so this is actually the chart that they used for it. Stand up so it's not weird. Okay, so if you heard Brent talking about the triad, what he's talking about is the 9, 3s, and 6s. They're actually kind of connected, and so it's really easy reference point. But every single number, so whatever your Enneagram number is, you can take a look at it and see the integration is what your heart point is what they describe it as. They call it integration, growth point, heart point. There's all means the same thing. When you're healthy, you adopt those qualities. So like when a 1 is healthy, they will adopt some of the qualities of a 7. And so whereas 1s can be kind of rigid, bound by the rules, 7s are like naturally really fun and lighthearted, so they'll take on some of those attributes. Whereas when a 1 is unhealthy, they're going to take on some of the aspects of a 4. And so this is just a really easy way of, if you know what your Enneagram number is, you can use these to just kind of gauge like where you're at. And so for me, I'm a 9, and so I know that I'm healthy when I'm acting more like a 3. Because naturally, not the sin of 9s is we're kind of slothful. We don't really do anything. We're like perfectly content to do nothing for the rest of our lives. And so 3s are very goal-driven. And so when I'm acting more in that manner, I can definitely gauge that I'm healthy. But if Brent, who's a 6, is acting like a 3, it definitely would not be the healthy side. I remember we were driving a couple weeks ago, and I said, well, babe, I kind of understand like how, you as a 6 moving into peace would be healthy, but I don't really get as much how a 9 would move to a 6 in unhealth. And he says, well, I think it'd be more like you're just naturally more angry at people and more judgmental. He did not need to say that. Felt like immediately convicted, like, oh God, I might need to go check my heart for a minute. So it's just a really great gauge because as followers of Jesus and the process of sanctification, it can be really big and daunting to kind of try and move healthy. And I think there's this misconception in the church sometimes that, you get baptized, you meet Jesus, and then you're just healthy, like you've arrived. And unfortunately, that's not the case. And so the Enneagram really acts as a cool compass to kind of point you towards a direction of what to actually strive for. For the sake of time, I say we skip this. Okay. Wonderful. So we're almost wrapped up. We're going to do groups tonight. There's a question that is going to be up on the slides that we didn't actually add, but I think would be a great thing to add. I think especially in the sense of the church, one of the biggest fallbacks that we can have is we don't really do a great job sometimes of addressing mental health. And it can be really easy to come into church and put this facade on and be like, yeah, I'm great. And unfortunately, leaders, we can be some of the worst culprits at it because we have this idea that we need to, lead. And sometimes we forget leading through vulnerability is one of the best ways to lead. And so I would really ask in the midst of groups that you embrace vulnerability and you embrace the hard moments. And so the question we're adding to this is, where are you actually at in the midst of your mental health? Like spiritually, emotionally, mentally, are you good? And if you're not good, like we just kind of want to talk about that, especially in light that we're talking. So the questions we're doing tonight, what aspects of the Enneagram 6 do you relate to and what are foreign to you? How challenging is it for you to stand for Jesus when desiring after the approval of other people? If moving towards health is moving closer to Jesus, how are you doing in prioritizing your relationship with God? And within the kingdom of God, what does the healthiest version of yourself look like?